Hey guys, I made a spline jig for hexagons on my table saw yesterday, and I had a lot of feedback on what my jig looks like and how I put it together. So I figured I'd show you. It's a really simple jig. It probably took me roughly five, maybe 10 minutes to put together with some pocket hole screws and a little bit of wood glue. Here is a hexagon that I put the splines in. I use walnut splines for this, and these are just the width of the saw blade. They're just the kerf of the blade. And then I cut down a piece of walnut and ran it through my drum sander until it was the right thickness, and then wood glued them in and then cut them with the Japanese pull saw, which I'll show you some footage of later on in this video. But this is what my jig looks like. I've seen a lot of these jigs similar to this one for cutting 90-degree miters, like on picture frames, but I hadn't seen anybody make one for hexagons, but it's the exact same concept. This is actually one miter of the hexagon itself. I just had an extra piece from that hexagon I showed earlier. And what I did was just measured from the top down and made sure that this was the exact same height on each side, and then made sure the bottom was flush with the bottom of the jig here. This point, you don't want it to be below this sidewall or it won't sit level on your table saw. But I just clamped and glued that together, and then this box part of it here is just the width and height of my saw stop. And I can give you some quick measurements on that, but like I said, this is specific to saw stop. Every table saw is going to be a little different. So this is 2 3/4 high for the sidewall, and then across it is 5.5 inches. And then I glued just another piece of 3/4 inch plywood right here that stood up a little bit taller to give me a clamping surface. So how this fits on here is once I put my fence in place and lock it in, this will just rest right on top of that. And if you make your cuts right, there won't be too much play. There's a little bit of side-to-side movement, but I wanted it to slide freely, like this one does. You can add a little bit of paste wax if you want it to move a little bit better. But once you get everything assembled and the glue is dry, I took and measured out my spacing so that I could do 3 splines, and you'll see the slots in there. I wanted to do 3 splines for this 1x6 size hexagon, and I can give you those measurements quick. From the fence, 1 inch to the edge of the first one, 2 5/8 of an inch to the edge of the second one, and 4 1/4 to the third one. And that gets you pretty darn close to even spacing if you want to do 3, which I would suggest for a 1x6. But once it's all dried up and ready to go, you set it in place, and then you just raise the blade of the saw a small amount, run it through, lift it up, and just keep working it through until you're completely your blade is penetrated completely through to the other side. Once everything is cut and you got it ready to go, I'll move the camera here quick. So once you have your jig in place like this, make sure it slides freely and doesn't bind on anything before you start. You just take your hexagon. For this hexagon, I actually use the CA glue method to attach the miters before I put the splines in. So you just use a little bit of that CA glue, a couple drops on each side, spray on the accelerator, and then just hold it for a few seconds. So it's not super strong until you get these splines in, which help drastically in the strength of these miter joints. Basically, you just set the saw in place like this. You'll see on mine that there is going to be a slight gap on the one side. It didn't fit quite perfectly, but it's good enough for me. And you'll take a clamp. I just use these Irwin quick clamps, but you don't want to use a clamp that has too high of a profile on this edge, because if it hangs out too far, you run the risk of catching it with your table saw. I just clamp it right here, like this, and that keeps it fairly sturdy. You set your blade to whatever depth you'd like. For me, you definitely don't want to go all the way through, so just inch it up until you get to about 3/4 of the way through your miter. Once you have it where you want it and you have your fence set where you want it, you simply start it up and run it through. And I'll show you how that works here in a second. But yeah, when you're all finished, unclamp it, you're good to go. Works pretty darn good. Super easy to make, you guys. Like I said, 10 minutes max. Of course, you got to let the glue dry, but I just use this out of scrap 3/4 inch plywood. On the inside here, you can see I just use pocket holes to hold it all together and glue, and that gave me a pretty sturdy jig for cutting out those splines. So let me know if you guys have any questions or if you need any more information on this spline jig, and thanks for watching.